All right. Welcome to our first Bitfinex virtual roundtable. The topic of discussion today will be Bitfinex Securities. I'll be your moderator, Ricardo Martinez. I have a lineup of excellent guests to discuss the topic. With me today is Stacy Herbert of El Salvador's Bitcoin office. We have Max Kaiser, who's the senior Bitcoin advisor to President Nayib Bukele. We have Paulo Arduino, who's the CTO of Bitfinex. We have Juan Carlos Reyes, who's the president of the National Commission of Digital Assets in El Salvador. And we have Jesse Knutson, who's the head of operations of Bitfinex Securities. I'm super happy to have you all with me this morning to discuss Bitfinex Securities and the recent launch in El Salvador and what that means for digital finance going forward. How's everybody doing today?
I'm doing very well. And welcome to El Salvador, Bitfinex Securities. It's nice to have you here, and Bitcoin Country welcomes you.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, Jesse, we have worked with you for 2 years now.
Yeah.
But it's super exciting. I mean, it's definitely the holy grail of finance, and I'm excited to see that El Salvador is leading the way. Cannot be a better country.
I also want to point out that Bitcoin Country is winning because of partners like Bitfinex and Bitfinex Security. So we appreciate all your support and partnership in building Bitcoin Country over the past 2.5 years. And this is just the beginning, as President Bukele might say.
Seguimos.
I want to kick off the discussion basically by talking about the significance of the launch of Bitfinex Securities. I know this has been a long time coming. A lot of pieces had to fall into place. Jesse, would you mind discussing what kind of milestone has been achieved here?
Yeah, I think this is a big milestone, and I think it follows up on a string of big milestones from El Salvador. You know, the first one was the passing of the Bitcoin law in 2021. And I think that that was certainly one of the big landmark events of the last cycle. And I think if we look forward 20 or 30 years, it'll be one of the big events within Bitcoin's history. So I think the follow-up on that was the passage of the digital asset regime. And this is the latest step in building out this idea of Bitcoin-based capital markets.
I'd also like to get Juan Carlos's perspective as the president of the Digital Asset Commission. How do you guys, as regulators, view these kind of developments taking place in El Salvador?
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. It's fantastic. I mean, we became Bitcoin country in 2021. We're extremely pro Bitcoin, and now it's time to increase the potential that the technology can do. And having Bitfinex being the first company registered in El Salvador is tremendous opportunities for us to not just participate, but to learn from one of the biggest and most organized and regulated entities out there in the world. So yeah, no, it's very exciting.
Paulo, seeing that you were instrumental in building the infrastructure behind Bitfinex Securities, do you have anything to add?
Well, first of all, I think it's Bitfinex Securities and the launch in El Salvador is the culmination of hard work of many people, of course, in Bitfinex Securities and Bitfinex from a technological point of view, effort in regulatory and licensing, but also is I think is a dream coming true. El Salvador, with the law that passed into history, with making them the first Bitcoin country and the only Bitcoin country, also making Bitcoin legal tender, shows the commitment and the seriousness of El Salvador to digital assets. So digital assets are not meme coins, are not dog coins. There is much more to that. It's going to be a long journey, but it's going to be a journey that is going to change the world, the world of finance. So it's easy to think about when people think about digital securities, digital assets, they think about tokenized Google shares and tokenized Apple shares. But the infrastructure that we're building in El Salvador is to create a new opportunity for all the small and medium-sized companies, to allow them to raise capital, to find capital globally. And that is a way to empower them and to not let them fall in the wrong hands of people that would squeeze them and would squeeze the people that work hard in those companies. We want to create a new world of finance that is more equal, that is peer-to-peer in a way, that put directly in contact and connection the builders, so the company owners that are seeking help to grow their company, improve their companies, directly with investors. And that is unprecedented in the financial history.
My next question is for Stacy. Could you briefly discuss what sort of support the Bitcoin office offered to businesses like Bitfinex Securities to get established in El Salvador? And then also, how has the legal tender law kind of changed the landscape within El Salvador?
Thank you for that question. So the Bitcoin office is within the president's office. So we work directly for President Bukele, and therefore we can speak for him on terms of Bitcoin policy. President Bukele is a Bitcoiner. That's it. He only believes in Bitcoin. He is a Bitcoiner. And he believes that Bitcoin, the capital markets built on Bitcoin is the only thing that makes sense, right? Because Bitcoin is the only layer one money. It's like gold and the US dollar, US treasuries before it. And only capital can only be formed upon money, right? It can't be formed upon a token, which is just a really fast database. That's, like Google is a company. It's not a money. So in terms of our commitment, in terms of time and energy, it's to companies like Bitfinex who have been good partners in terms of building Bitcoin country. This is the most important brand value to El Salvador, is that we are Bitcoin country. And partners like Bitfinex who help build that brand are where the Bitcoin office is allowed to allocate our time and resources. So we believe that if Bitfinex Securities is building capital markets on Bitcoin, that is something that we support, and that's what we encourage, and that's what we believe is the future. And that's where our first mover advantage will really shine through in the coming years. As Paolo pointed out, it's paso a paso, right? It's not going to happen overnight. There aren't going to be, we're not going to be competing with Wall Street overnight, but this is the beginning. We're still early in Bitcoin. So of course, that we're building capital markets on Bitcoin is still super early, right? So we believe, however, we have the right partners, we have the right mission, and we have the right brand value to be the number one destination. That's our unique brand versus, say, Dubai or Hong Kong or other places which are like targeting crypto and altcoins and really fast databases.
Thank you. We heard Jesse just a few moments ago mention that the launch of Bitfinex Securities would not have been possible without the digital asset regulatory framework. I'd like to discuss that for a moment. How does it support or hinder financial innovation within El Salvador?
Well, Max and I, we first started working on the digital assets laws over 2 years ago. And part of that was inspired by the fact that we are Bitcoin country. And we were looking at the writing on the wall, right? We saw Gary Gensler say, Bitcoin is a commodity, i.e. money. Everything else is a security. So that gave us a first mover advantage because everybody was acting like there was no regulatory clarity anywhere. So we said, let's provide regulatory clarity. He's saying exactly what the US is believes their system is, right? But they choose to do regulation through enforcement. We just chose to do regulation through regulation, right? We want to regulate via regulation. So, we worked with partners around the world in terms of trying to come up with the best practices, like the gold standard of regulatory environments for the digital assets. So we didn't want to be, we didn't want to encourage what was going on in the US, by the way, while we were writing these regulations, was the collapse of Celsius, the collapse of BlockFi, the collapse of FTX. We didn't want that here. So that was also inspiring, like what we were writing here.
Yeah, if I can add on that quickly, Ricardo, I think that, in our conversations with regulators and policymakers globally, I think that El Salvador has almost uniquely hit on the truly innovative and economically significant parts of the digital asset industry, right? Which I think is probably Bitcoin, stable coins, and then tokenized assets, whether they're securities or commodities. And I think really the challenge for regulators and policymakers globally has been able to split out the noise in our industry, which I think is a lot of the penny stock kind of casino stuff, from the innovation and the parts of the industry that can actually move the needle and be accretive to the economy. And I think, probably El Salvador seems to have done that better than almost anybody else that we've been in contact with.
Yeah, if I can add something into that. So, Bitcoin is a new asset class, and it's a unique asset class. This is something we pointed out over 10 years ago. This is why we started getting into Bitcoin, because if it is a new asset class, then it is very much a new asset class, then it would be a multi-trillion-dollar market. So the laws have to reflect the fact that we're talking about a synthetic, digital, absolutely scarce commodity. And it bridges between several different classifications, and yet it's a unique asset class. So the laws are favoring the fact that in El Salvador, Bitcoin and only Bitcoin is recognized as money and something that can be legitimately used to build a new securities industry on top of. And the law are equally abhorrent or rejects everything but Bitcoin, because everything that's not Bitcoin would be considered essentially a security and needs to go down the path of being registered as a security. And using this approach, which is both a sword and a shield, we've been able to keep out the bad actors, the Lunas and the Celsius and all of the scams. They didn't touch El Salvador because we were very emphatically persistent in making sure that regulatory framework made clear that it's Bitcoin and Bitcoin country, and everything else needs to go down the path of regulations of a security. And it's worked out so far very well. Bitfinex now is going to build on top of this bedrock, this regulatory bedrock, a new securities industry. And Bitcoin is a genius in the sense that the transaction is the settlement. So you don't need 90% of Wall Street back office. It is the pristine collateral. We will be competing with Wall Street in the City of London.
Juan Carlos, do you have anything that you'd like to add about the digital asset framework?
Yeah, definitely. I think, from a regulator, we take a risk-based approach. In reality, everything else is extremely risky. So, many companies have landed in El Salvador thinking that it's lawless land, that they can just start operating. And since we do have a regulation and supervision arm, we've been able to contact companies that are trying to do digital assets in El Salvador and advising them about the law and about the implications that apply if you try to operate in El Salvador unregulated. Jesse alluded to this. El Salvador, I explain it to people that we were sort of baptized through fire because we had to learn very rapidly the difference between, or I guess the gap that exists between the traditional finance industry and the digital assets industry. Hence, this led the country to decide to carve out all digital assets regulation from the traditional finance sector and created what is known as the Commission of Digital Assets. We overlooked everything that's digital assets in the country, and we have a team of experts that understand the technology, that have been in the industry. I myself bought my first Bitcoins in 2014 and have been a Bitcoiner for a long time. But understanding where digital assets is going it's something that Paolo alluded to earlier, is that from the perspective of El Salvador, we are seeing now that, we never had an easy access to markets. Strings have always been dangled to being able to access any type of financial flexibility in the country. And what Bitfinex is doing by creating an infrastructure where now smaller companies and international companies, we have to remember that digital assets don't really have borders. So creating this financial infrastructure that would allow companies and countries and small towns and projects in the country to be able to raise funding through Bitfinex Securities is something tremendous. And all of this has been able to be accomplished because of very strong regulation that we have created in El Salvador.
Yeah, if I can add something to that, I really believe that this approach that starts from Bitcoin, but applies the same concepts and the rigorousness of Bitcoin to digital assets broadly, is what is going to make El Salvador as the place in the country, the winner in Central and South America when it comes to this new wave of financial services. So if you are a small, medium-sized company or a big company in the future, you will seek to be listed in El Salvador, because that is the place where all the good companies will be listed. There is, in all the other countries, there will be confusion. You will see crypto projects popping up without much control, and that will ruin the market also of digital securities. But I think El Salvador has the unique position of becoming the center of finance of Central and South America because of that, because of the fact that it's taking this approach extremely seriously and is not being pushed around, and lured into mistaking the entire crypto market as a good thing, but is doing a thorough due diligence to only allow good projects. And surely it will take, as I said, a long time, but it takes always in order to make a real revolution, and one that is so difficult, like financial revolution, takes always a long time. But the result, the gains, the opportunities are immense. So that's why we're super excited to be part of it.
Thank you. This question is more directed at both Paolo and Jesse, but everyone else can feel free to chime in as well. You just kind of touched on it a little bit, Paolo, but what is the long-term role and vision that you both see for Bitfinex Securities?
I can start. In finance, especially if you have a small to medium-sized company and you want to raise capital, there are few ways. First of all, the first one, especially if you're a small company, you have to go to your bank and hope and pray they will give you a loan. Especially with the current global financial situation, for small companies, it's getting harder and harder to get a loan. If you are a mid-sized company, you can try to get involved with venture capitalists, and it can go well, but and you are able to raise capital or not. Even if you are able to raise capital from a VC, what usually happens is that you are going to give to such VC a huge portion of your company just because they are helping you, and they know that in this particular moment in time, access to liquidity and capital is extremely difficult. So they will use that as a leverage to squeeze you. What I think is the missing piece in the world is not, again, taking existing stocks like Google, Apple, and others and tokenize them and just offer them in a different shape and form, is to give opportunities to small and medium-sized companies to directly interact with potential investors, and investors that can have access to a good overview of the company, the investors that can reach out companies that are maybe on the other side of the ocean, because now again investors are only allowed to access to offerings that are being offered by big banks, right? So because if you have a mid-sized company or mid to big size company, you would go to a bank to have this bank trying to pitch your product and your offering to retail and institutional customers. But then again, will cost enormous amount in fees. So if you are a small, medium, or big size company, you will, if you are lucky and you can raise some money, you will have to pay huge fees, and you will have to leave out or to have to deal with the many intermediaries that will squeeze you throughout the entire process. The beauty of Bitfinex Securities is that it tries just to remove as many layers as possible and put every company, small, medium, and big, in front of the investors directly, and investors that again understand the potential of investing in companies that are listed in the country that is proving that safety, both physical and digital, is taken extremely seriously.
Jesse, do you have anything that you'd like to add about the role and vision of Bitfinex Securities?
Yeah, I think that's really well put, and I think I have a lot of the same thoughts. I think that looking at traditional finance, legacy markets, in terms of a market structure perspective, I think over the last 20 or 30 years, I guess the last 20 years, the internet has really changed everything, right? And it's massively changed every industry. I think finance and capital markets, though, have been kind of uniquely resistant to technological change. So I often say that I think the goal and the opportunity for Bitfinex Securities isn't really all that complex. We're simply trying to take the technological advantages from Bitcoin and the digital asset industry that I think at this point are pretty well battle tested, and then apply those to traditional capital markets. And echoing what Paulo said, I think that yields a system where investors and issuers are able to interact a lot more directly and efficiently. And I think that lets us prune back some of the layers of intermediaries that are in many cases, I think, probably technologically unnecessary, but have kind of grown out organically with the evolution of markets and regulations over the past several decades, and really built some pretty deep moats in some cases. People often wonder why we're in El Salvador, why we're in Kazakhstan and the AIFC. And these are places where financial services as a percent of GDP is lower. So there's less pushback from the incumbents who have dug very deep moats. And there's more upside and less downside. And I think the technological advantages of Bitfinex Securities and this idea of tokenized securities and commodities is going to be a real pull factor, pulling in investors and issuers, because there's some pretty unique benefits. On the trader side, some of the real benefits are real-time settlement, global liquidity, 24/7 trading. And just on the real-time settlement side, I'm in Taiwan. My capital market experience was in Taiwan equities. And we're T+2 settlement, right? So if you sell your TSMC on Friday, you don't get your cash until the following week. Whereas on Bitfinex and Bitfinex Securities, it's instant. And then also for users, the opportunity to regain control of their assets that I think is in many ways been eroded over the last couple of decades. And to use things like the Liquid Network, which is a Bitcoin sidechain, which allows us to tick the boxes on our regulatory and AML requirements, but still allow users a really low friction experience. You're able to self-custody your assets, you're able to pull them off the platform, send them to other platforms for arbitrage, and then to even do things like trade your assets peer-to-peer within a whitelisted ecosystem. And so I think these technological advantages that we have, they create efficiencies that allow us to operate at a lower cost point. And then that lets us go and facilitate issuances, like Paulo said, for issuers in places that are kind of walled off from traditional capital markets because of their size, maybe their SMEs, or because of their geographic location. So as Paulo and we said at the beginning, I think there's a real kind of inclusivity story here behind what we're trying to do with Bitfinex Securities in places like Central Asia and in El Salvador.
Thanks, Jesse. Juan Carlos, Max, Stacy, do you guys have anything to add about Bitfinex Securities and its role and vision within El Salvador?
Well, the timing is fantastic because the legacy system built on fiat money is collapsing. The 300-year experiment of fiat money in central banks is ending. It failed. And the visionary that President Bukele understands this, and he's ready to lead the world. You know, the first country out of this fourth turning mess that the fiat money created will be El Salvador. El Salvador is the new land of liberty and hope. And Bitfinex Securities is the capital markets that are going to support that.
I also believe what Paolo was saying was a very good point to make about access to the capital markets. You know, in the late stages of this US dollar hegemony, if you were in New York or San Francisco, close to the San Francisco Fed or the New York Fed, you got 0% money. By the time it reached El Salvador, like in this proof of stake system, it's at 20% for ordinary individuals, even though their good credit rating, even here in El Salvador, they have the top credit rating and they still pay far more than anybody at all in America. So this is by the nature of the fact that they get to mint that currency, right? Well, nobody can mint Bitcoin from a central authority, right? So these are the new capital markets, and the access to those is equal between all people around the world now. And I think that could level the playing field. And just as El Salvador has the most geothermal capacity per capita, I think all of that stranded energy that had been there for centuries, right, can now be tapped because of Bitcoin. And the same sort of potential of the individuals and the companies operating here can now also access capital, and we could tap into that previously stranded entrepreneurial spirit that is here in El Salvador.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, having Bitfinex Securities in El Salvador opens the market for, look, it's been no secret now that most large consulting firms such as McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group have been predicted that the real world tokenization will happen. And I mean, predictions go as lucrative as $15 trillion by 2030. You know, having Bitfinex Securities in El Salvador that has created special benefits for companies to actually come be regulated and be part of El Salvador. I mean, at this point, one of the perhaps the most friendly benefit in the world is, one, you have a single regulatory framework. Two, working closely with Bitfinex and other great companies that are in the country, we have been able to create a streamlined regulatory process to be able to allow companies to be tokenized on platforms like Bitfinex Securities. And then as part of that, as a registered company in El Salvador, you also receive a lot of fiscal benefits. For example, if the profits that you make through a tokenization or your digital assets will not be taxed. Bitcoin is a legal currency here, so you can transfer your tokens to Bitcoin and be able to interact in the country freely. So there's a lot of benefits, and having Bitfinex Security as one of the largest players in the world come and cement themselves in El Salvador to allow companies worldwide to raise capital is definitely a true benefit for El Salvador.
Thank you so much. My next question, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to answer it or not, but the whole world is curious about the status of the Volcano bonds in El Salvador. We've all heard so much about it. It's 2024, a new year. Would you be able to provide any update or context about the Volcano bond?
Well, the Volcano Bond is, of course, the first to receive regulatory approval of all of them. And this is the question that we get asked the most: when Volcano Bond, when Volcano Bond, when Volcano Bond. You know, we have to get it right. And so we are working very carefully on all of the terms and conditions, and all that everybody wins, right? That El Salvador has to win and the investors have to win. It has to make sense. And we are working with Bitfinex, you know, on making sure the prospectus is right, that the terms are right, and that we can all agree to it. But it is definitely something that there's a huge demand for it, and people want it around the world. every morning, and when I go onto Twitter, there's a whole bunch of tweets asking when the Volcano Bond. So just for that reason alone, we need to issue it. But Max is the original guy who came up with the idea of Volcano Bond 2 years ago.
People ask about Volcano Bond because they want to participate in the growth of El Salvador. And there are lots of ways to do it. You can move here. You can get citizenship in 6 weeks. You can start buying property. Property is a traditional way that people participate in an emerging economy's growth. I myself have been very active in this. And when the bond comes, the GDP could have already been up 20% or something like that. So if you're interested in participating in the fact that El Salvador's GDP over the next 5 years is going to double, it's going to be bigger than Costa Rica, it's going to be $70 to $75 billion. And you want to take advantage of the fact that we get the most visionary, Bitcoin-centric, Bitcoin maximalist president, just move your ass to El Salvador and shut up. Just come here, move here, buy a property, and everything you want will come your way. Don't be memeing your life to oblivion, okay? The Volcano Bond is a meme. Come here and be real.
But of course, do recognize that we have been very busy preparing for the landslide election to happen this weekend. So the president was a little bit busy on that and preparing for that. But hopefully, like we did announce back in December that we aim for the first quarter of 2024. Hopefully we can meet that. But I know there is demand. So hopefully we can provide what everybody wants.
Does anyone else have any other hints they might be able to give?
I think Max nailed it.
Nice. Jesse, I'm going to field this one to you and
Sure.
Paolo again. Can you guys kind of talk about the strategic goals that Bitfinex Securities has laid out, like on the path forward?
Want to start, Jesse?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I think the strategic goal for Bitfinex Securities in El Salvador is kind of to develop a proof of concept, right? To develop this idea of a viable Bitcoin-based markets ecosystem that can then be a template that we can replicate in other markets and geographies. And I think until very recently, I think most people in traditional finance and developed markets probably would have written this concept off. But over the last 12 months, I think we've seen the kind of market come our way. And I think that in a lot of ways, the consensus view is kind of caught up to our vision. So I think if we can get El Salvador right and we can develop, a robust capital market here, then we've got a good case to go to other jurisdictions around the world and push for Bitcoin adoption and push for the creation of digital asset or security token regulation as well.
I think the way Jesse has put it is definitely correct. I want to reiterate once again that I think the most important thing for me is that Bitfinex is not scared of hard work. We know that technologies and technological changes, and especially in finance, will take a long time. It's like when I've been asked multiple times if I think that Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador has went well. And usually the journalists that are asking that question are trying to make look like the change didn't happen yet or is not happening so fast, right? That Bitcoin is not heavily used in El Salvador yet. The reality is that even in Europe, when Europe wanted to change the currency, right? That up to the year 2000, all the countries in Europe had their own national currency. But then after 2000, they started to use the common currency called euro. It took several years to create the euro as a currency, to start changing the entire financial framework and all the banking system and all the investments and everything to start, and every single merchant to start accepting the euro and start to understand the euro. Everyone was super scared. And that change was imposed and forced down the throat of everyone. The beauty of El Salvador is that it's taking another path, is creating optionalities, creating solutions, is allowing people to choose to opt out from fiat currencies into the strongest currency ever built. And we are not scared of hard work. We are not scared of keep building. and it's too easy for the traditional media establishment to mock and to diminish this effort. But as they were wrong on the fact that Bitcoin would become mainstream, and this year in 2024 we have seen it, they are wrong and will be wrong about Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador and the potential of digital securities coming from El Salvador. So for us, it's gonna be a long way to the top, but we are going to rock and roll.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I want to continue the discussion, but switch topics. I would like to know about the global implications and opportunities that the launch of Bitfinex Securities presents, both for investors within El Salvador and abroad.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of attracting global investors, I think this is already happening, right? So, I mean, on the Bitfinex Securities platform more broadly. So, in fourth quarter of last year, we did one of the first, I think, truly tokenized bond issuances globally for a microfinancing company. A great company with scale in this industry and a strong record of issuing conventional bond issuances. They issued a 10% coupon bond, and we've got plans to do more with them. I think we've got a really solid pipeline. We've got more than a dozen companies in the pipeline for El Salvador. A number of those are before the listing committee at the moment. And I think really encouragingly, we have a real mix of companies as well. So we don't just have, international companies, we have some really good domestic companies as well. And a lot of those are, to touch on Max's point earlier, are infrastructure plays as well. So it's a way to not only, make an investment, but to support what's happening in El Salvador as well. I think one of the challenges we have is making inroads with more traditional securities investors, people like private wealth and family offices. And I think that'll come in time with more issuances, more proof of concepts to point to people and to get more assets on the platform, hash rate tokens, bonds, REITs, equity, fund-like products, asset-backed tokens, all of those. And then the more we get, I think that kind of feeds on it, and we can point more kind of proof of concepts and examples to people and attract more issuers globally. But certainly there's a lot of interest.
Yeah, if I could just add something to the Volcano Bond conversation and how it fits into the securities matrix of different things on offer. Remember 2 years ago when the bond idea was first floated, we were still in a 40-year bull market in bonds. In 2022, we entered a bear market, a multiple-year protracted secular bear market in bonds. Bonds are not really a preferred investment choice anymore and won't be for many years. So that's part of my discussion at the highest level about, do we really want to lock people into an investment that's essentially crap? A bond. Bonds suck. Okay, that's the bottom line. So therefore, we did Volcano Energy, which is a private equity deal, PPP, which offers true upside. We hope to do something with Bitfinex Securities maybe next year on the token side. That would give people genuine upside. Bonds offer zero upside, only downside. We're in a new inflationary world where bonds are not being bought anymore because of the collapse in the fiat money world. So that's part of the factor. We're not just out there going to float something because somebody who's completely ill-informed about financial markets heard from somebody on Twitter that this was a good idea. No, we're responsible. We're fiduciaries. We're not going to be sucked into that.
Thanks for that insight, Max. Jesse, Paulo, what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you guys see for both companies or governments that want to leverage digital asset markets?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in here. I think that's a great question. I think the challenge for both developed and developing markets, I think, is probably for both is momentum. In developed markets, you have really entrenched incumbents, as we touched on before, who are very fixed in the way they do things. There's a large number of middlemen and institutions at this point that I think are probably technologically unnecessary, but that have built really deep moats over time. And then in developing markets where financial services are typically a much lower percent of GDP, you have a lot less pushback and a lot less baggage. The risk reward is better, it's more favorable. But the challenge is basically to build these new capital markets up from scratch. So I think that can be a big challenge. My kind of view more broadly is that the tokenization opportunity is just inherently skewed towards places like El Salvador and Central Asia, the AIFC, where we also have an entity for these kinds of small to mid-sized economies, which, interestingly, is also where products like Tether and Bitcoin are actually being used. I think there's a real split between the G7 and the rest of the world in terms of how these assets are used and viewed. Bitcoin is and Tether are both used, I think, in Latin and South America really actively, and whereas in the West, in the G7, Bitcoin is basically another speculative asset, I think, in a lot of cases. So in terms of the opportunity, I think the opportunity is really a way to close the gap with legacy financial centers. If it's El Salvador, the AIFC, I think it's basically impossible for them to compete with traditional centers like London, New York. Pick a financial center head to head in capital markets. But if you embrace this technology, there's an opportunity, I think, to compete with these financial centers asymmetrically and to close the gap and to create new financial centers. And I think that's really what's the most exciting part of this to everyone on this call.
Yeah, building on that, I think I'm fairly bearish on the G7, G20 countries, honestly, because they are so slow and so, in many ways, European, so obnoxious in the way they approach finance, that it will. So from 2024, this is going to be a new era for small to medium-sized countries that can move fast, that they understand technology, they embrace a new way to grow the country, to digitalize the country, to create strong fundamentals for the countries. And this is only possible in emerging markets and developing countries in this type of economies. Unfortunately, Europe especially, and might have. I'm less familiar with North America, but for sure, Europe is becoming a place where everything is stagnant. People are seeing the economy going down, and they don't see new opportunities. I feel like every time I travel, I see the opportunities coming, and new opportunities always being more interesting in South and Central America, or in Central Asia. And that is sad to be said by an European, but it is what it is. And though I'm super excited because there are countries that again are embracing this new wave, and they are going to leverage it to completely change the dynamics in the country and to bring much more wealth to the population. So that's where I think everyone should be. Everyone should be in these type of countries, starting from El Salvador.
Let me add to that is that President Bukele often tweets, strong men create good times. And everybody knows that cycle, right? In Europe and the US, and I could speak to the US because we have a house there and we're US taxpayers. Compare the two systems of here in El Salvador, people have to work, right? Because we are not able to print our own money. And that, you could say, maybe individually people are like, oh, that sucks. I wish I could be in America and sit at home and receive my Biden bucks and my PPP loans, my free money, right? Or rack up millions of dollars in debt to go to university and then have it written off, right? Well, that's destroying capital markets, because if you think about it, capital markets need capital to exist. And if you're destroying the capital foundation of your country by writing off all the student debts, issuing all these PPP loans. Max and I were offered a PPP loan that during the COVID crisis, right, of $2 million. Take this loan, our bank said, because you know what? You don't have to pay it back. Well, that sounds like a scam to me. It sounds too good to be true. I took it as a scam, as a too good to be true offer. So we never took it. But it turns out it was a too good to be true. Now we see the collapse, the beginning of the collapse of capital markets there, because look at the commercial real estate market collapsing. Look at all the inflation happening there. Nobody has to work there. You didn't have to work to receive all that money. And we saw that through COVID. But here in El Salvador, people have to work. It's hard work. It's not easy to build Bitcoin country. But I think work always pays off, right? Like working hard and building pays off.
Yeah, as to follow up on what Stacy is saying there, you can't have capitalism without capital. You can't have capital without savings, and you can't have savings unless you're giving people the chance to save in a non-inflationary money. So therefore, capitalism, as that term is understood, does not exist in any place in the world today, post-1971, on a pure fiat money standard, except in El Salvador, where Bitcoin is legal tender. This is the home of capitalism. The new Statue of Liberty is a volcano in El Salvador. And Bitfinex Securities is now first mover advantage, building on this rock solid truth. And the people here, like I just saw on one of my favorite Twitter accounts, Salvadoran Pride, pusa sellers at 6 a.m. grinding it out, right? To follow up on what Paolo was just saying, and the obnoxious Europeans. Yes, they are obnoxious because they're on a welfare system and nobody works in Europe. Here, it's like we work and we save because we have Bitcoin, and nobody can take that Bitcoin away from us. It's unconfiscatable. Do you understand the implications of that? It separates money from state. Do you understand what's happening? If you do, you'd be booking a flight right now and get off this call and show up at the airport. That's what I'm saying.
You could watch this on the flight, of course. So you don't have to get off this call. Make sure you stay tuned.
Yeah. Ricardo, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, guys. Thank you to all of the panelists. So far, the discussion's been amazing. I want to open it up to some questions from Eva Saleh, who is a former reporter for Bloomberg and Financial Times. She's kind enough to join us, and she has a couple of questions for you all.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me, and I'm dialing in from Europe working, so here we go. I have a quick question about regulation. I understand that El Salvador has recently established the National Commission on Digital Assets. I'd love to know what that means for the future of the regulatory framework that you're laying at the moment. And I'll have a sort of flip side question after we get an answer from that. Could we maybe come to Juan Carlos with this?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
I understand that El Salvador has recently established a National Commission on Digital Assets, and so I'm wondering what that means for the future of regulation.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I mean, if you look around the world, the financial traditional markets, and Jesse and Max have alluded to this, we have very influential bodies around the world. I mean, the banks in the United States and in every other country, there is well-established banks, financial institutions that are not looking at the development of digital assets as a benefit. They look at it as competition. So the establishment of the commission in El Salvador, it is the first of its kind in the world where digital assets has been completely separated from traditional markets, allowing us to have people that understand the technology make decisions, do a risk-based assessment of what technologies are going to be introduced in El Salvador. So the doors that it opens up globally for El Salvador to become an international hub of financial. And this is something that Bitfinex, I mean, they've always been pioneers in the industry. I mean, there's a reason why Tether is the number 3 coin in the world, and it's because they were first adopters, first in the industry, and they see this in El Salvador. They understand that, the Boston Consulting Group sees that this is going to be $15 trillion. They don't just predict it; they actually act on it. So the establishment of Bitfinex Securities here in El Salvador is a testament of the great vision that the president has for digital assets, and I think we will continue to be globally the only country leading forward, just because we have Bitcoin as a digital as our currency, and on top of that, we're the only ones that have a specialized body that looks after digital assets.
Thank you so much. And my question, the flip side question, is to Jesse and Paolo, please, about what difference this framework that already exists in El Salvador, with Bitcoin being a legal tender, with being pretty forward with the regulatory framework, what difference did that make in terms of the launch that you did there? You know, how is it different from other countries that you've gone into? And are there any kind of lessons or, I don't know, maybe examples that you think you'll carry away from this experience?
If I can start, thank you, Eva, for your question. The issue that we have and we see, not as a company, but as an industry, is lack of regulatory clarity. For example, I will go back to Europe. Now, after many years, Europe is working on this, on the MiCA license, right? And the MiCA license is more focused towards digital assets in the form that we are all used to, i.e., the cryptocurrencies, right? So all all the different tokens, all the different new blockchain tokens, and so on and so forth. A little bit less about digital securities. So the lack of clarity, the lack of speed in embracing this new wave of financial services, I think, is what is making it difficult elsewhere in the world. So what I think you can see in El Salvador is the ability to, first of all, they embrace Bitcoin as legal tender. So it's clear that they saw the opportunity there and they make the change happen fast. At the same time, they saw also the opportunity on the wave of making Bitcoin as a legal tender as the opportunity to keep leading the way and listen to to the companies that actually are trying to build good services and they embrace also these new digital securities, create a framework for that, create a framework and a discussion. I mean, that is really important. We are able to have an open discussion with the regulator to express our opinions, to give feedback. And this is a process that has been fairly fast. It doesn't, although it has its own bureaucracy as normal, as it is normal, it doesn't have the excessive bureaucracy and the slowness of institutions that we have seen and experienced so many times in other places in the world, especially in let's say first world countries, someone would call them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, I mean, we were joking around at the beginning how it's taken some time to put this together and launch the platform, and we've all been in chats and working on this for 2 years. But I think that whole time it's been directionally correct, right? We had a mission, we had a vision, and we were slowly making progress. And it was just about embracing the grind and moving the ball forward. And I think that's, as Paulo mentioned, that's something that's, not often the case in other regimes. It's difficult to get access to regulators. It's difficult to give feedback and have open communications. And I think that's one thing that's been really good about El Salvador is we've had an opportunity to give feedback on the regulations and to work with the development on them. So I think that's been a really constructive kind of relationship. And then touching on what Paulo said about regulatory clarity, I've kind of thought of the security tokenization opportunity, which Juan Carlos has mentioned is, in the trillions, right? So it's some percentage of global private equity, global public equity, global real estate, all of this stuff, commodities added up, and then, whatever percentage you think that we can take from the legacy system. So it's a huge opportunity, right? And I've kind of characterized this as, there's 3 parts of the puzzle that we need to do to execute on this opportunity. And it's, having investable assets, having good issuers. I think we're getting that on the platform now, and we're getting that in our pipeline. The second thing is the technology. I think we've ticked that box, right? We've got the technology to do tokenization, to have whitelists, to give a really kind of low friction experience to investors within those whitelists. And things like real-time settlement on the Bitfinex and the Bitfinex Securities platform. And the third part that's been the slowest to develop and has been, kind of the limiting factor within the industry is not only regulatory clarity, but commercially viable regulatory oversight. Regulations that will let us grow and contribute to the domestic economy. And I think that's something that El Salvador really got right as well. I think that's something else that, the whole world will be watching El Salvador as a proof of concept going forward.
Thank you so much. I'll hand back to Ricardo.
Thank you, Eva. Does anyone have any final comments before we close out the stream?
I guess I'll add to one of the points that Paolo made in terms of, El Salvador, how we are attracting high integrity companies. And that's what the Bitcoin office has done for President Bukele, because of the nature of the fact that Max and I have been in Bitcoin since late 2010, early 2011. And we know many of the OGs in the space. And we have been targeting specifically people that we've known for 12 years who have survived not only the bear markets, which showed that they know, they're good businessmen, right? But also importantly, several bull cycles, because those are the hardest to survive with your integrity intact. And we have seen many early Bitcoiners just destroy their reputations on the bull markets. We believe we're entering a massive bull market now, and El Salvador is Bitcoin country, and President Bukele is one of the top names in the whole Bitcoin space. His integrity in the space is very high. His brand value is massively high. We understand that there are many people in this space for this bull market who will enter El Salvador trying to, by association or just standing next to El Salvador, try to degrade that brand value. But what the Bitcoin office has done is attract and work closely with the likes of Bitfinex, with Strike, with Fold, with Azteco. Domestically, we have Dito Banks coming up with a lot of interesting, really fascinating new capital markets on Bitcoin as well. So we've been working closely from the president's office with those who are high integrity and that have proven through 3 or 4 bull markets that they maintain their integrity throughout. So we believe we are well positioned for this bull market coming, and thanks to people like Paolo and Bitfinex.
Thank you, Stacey. And from my point of view, it's written on the wall that this will happen, that digital securities will be a success. They will completely change finance, access to capital for companies, and it will take time, but it will happen. So I think dismissing this opportunity is would only show naivety, and just stay tuned, because this is a story that is going to be extremely important for the world. Not because, of course, it's Bitfinex. I mean, I'm really excited that Bitfinex is leading the way, but I think, I think everyone in Bitfinex is more interested in making a revolution happen, helping good technology, and that helps people, that helps communities to embrace freedom. That is what we do care mostly about. And we believe that the same concepts that apply to Bitcoin, they should apply to the general financial world. And there is no way back. This is already started. It is already in motion. And I strongly recommend to everyone just to follow the developments and be part of it. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paolo.
I think that's great. I think we pretty much covered everything. I would say that I think what's exciting about El Salvador beyond Bitcoin and the capital markets part is this interesting new model on how an emerging or frontier market can go from being an emerging or frontier market to not being an emerging or frontier market. And this is part of the really exciting thing about El Salvador, and part of this idea of it being a proof of concept. If you look at history over the last 50 or 60 years, there haven't been really that many countries that have navigated that path. I think, I'm based in Taiwan, so the examples that come to my mind are like the 4 Asian dragons or tigers, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan. And I think if you would have looked at these places, 50 or 60 years ago, who would have thought that Singapore would become like a global financial hub? Who would have thought Taiwan would have been a technology hub leading the world in semiconductors, 2 and 1 nanometer semiconductor, kind of manufacturing. So things that sound impossible can happen. And I think, El Salvador is on the path to doing that and proving a lot of people wrong. And I think at the same time, also making it easier for other countries and jurisdictions to come forward and support Bitcoin and support this idea of tokenized capital markets. You know, if you remember, there was in 2021 when El Salvador came out with this idea, there was a lot of pushback, you know, from powerful people and powerful institutions. And I think people have maybe forgot that a little bit. And I think the success that they've had with their economy, which to be honest wasn't, you know, it's not completely all Bitcoin, right? There's a lot of other things that went into it to make the economy really successful. You know, it makes it easier for countries now to follow that same path and adopt Bitcoin. And I think it's just like with institutional adoption, where we've got the ETFs, you know, with sovereign adoption and institutional adoption, it adds another layer of legitimacy to what we're trying to do. And I think those layers become compounding to a point, like Paulo said, it just becomes inevitable. It's moving too fast for it to be stopped. And I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're even seeing people, you know, the titans of traditional finance, like Larry Fink from BlackRock, they're all looking at this too as an opportunity. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. And I would say stay tuned and sign up for Bitfinex Securities and make sure that you're you know, you're ready to go when we start having issuances come to the platform.
Yeah. Just in closing, Ricardo, one of the things that I'd like to mention is that, you know, since we are doing a new approach, we're also adding humanity to it. We're humanizing the access to capital, which is something that hasn't happened. I mean, it's always been forbidden. Paolo alluded to this quite a bit, that it's been and Stacy and Max, that it's always been a restricted way, and humanizing it, it's something that we're doing through El Salvador. I think Max always alludes to the fact that El Salvador is now the home of freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And living here now, I can truly see it. I see the difference. And I think that, you know, partners like Bitfinex and the work that we're doing will just help us to cement that vision for the country. Thanks for this.
I'd like to say thank you to all the panelists as well. Juan Carlos, Jesse, Paolo, Max, Stacy. Thank you so much for coming on the stream and shedding some light on the launch of Bitfinex Securities and the potential for the digital asset markets.
This is
Thank
just
you,
the
everyone.
beginning.
Thanks
This
for
is
starting.
just the beginning, I want to say. It's important to understand that. So climb on board the rocket ship, because we're about to take off.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.